Good morning and good afternoon for some of us today. Thanks for joining FSMA Friday for May 2021. Spring is definitely sprung. My name is Aaron Bolshaw, the moderator for FSMA Fridays. For those of you joining us for the first time, it's an ongoing monthly industry update for food and beverage facility operators, QA, safety and compliance professionals, all of you lovely people out there. We team up with the Atchison Group. SafetyChain teams up with the Atchison Group to bring you guidance and thought leadership on a host of topics revolving around the Food Safety Modernization Act. So TAG's been very generous with their time and talent throughout their tenure with us, and we're happy to have them back again. We've got a little bit of FSMA related news coming up, and then we're going to jump into the Reportable Food Registry. This is nothing new, right? We're covering it, just kind of an update, just sort of a refresher for the RFR. Remember, if you don't have enough acronyms yet, RFR is for Reportable Food Registry. Keep our acronyms going as best as possible. Everyone is on mute. We do want to hear from you, though. We're going to take your questions through the webinar console panel to your right. As you want to through the presentation. We'll get to as many of those as we can at the end of the session today. We're scheduled for 30 minutes. We might go a little long because we have, I'm guessing we're going to have a few specific questions. So with that, I would like to introduce today's presenter. Mary Hoffman is the Director of Food Safety at the Atchison Group up in near Milwaukee anyway. 17 plus years of experience, food safety and quality program development and continuous improvement. So that's a really fun dual threat there. She leads proactive initiatives to ensure food safety, and that's everything from supply chain risk to allergen control and even EHS and behavior-based food safety culture programs. So really cool background. Also degrees from Carroll University and Master of Agriculture and Life Sciences with an emphasis in food safety and biosecurity from Virginia Polytech. So Mary, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Aaron. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, great. So Mary, very great topic today covering RFR. You had a great idea of putting a quiz together. So I'm going to give everyone the warning right now. At the end of today's presentation, we're going to go through a quiz. So there is a pop quiz today, so please take notes, right?
We'll try to help make it's a lot of information. We'll try to help make it sink in.
Yeah, all right. Well, Mary, take it away. Start out, if you would, just a high level, anything updates from FSMA that you see coming through.
Sure, there's a few things that have come up in the past few weeks that we just wanted to briefly mention. So the first is the FSVP portal for record submission. So as you say with the acronyms, that's the Foreign Supplier Verification Program portal. So the FDA recently opened the portal for importers of human and animal food into the United States. And it's really just, it's a streamlined way for importers to submit their FSVP records electronically to the FDA if they choose. So this is entirely voluntary portal. The second is the Leafy Green Initiative. Just to mention that the FDA continues their focus on the safety of leafy greens. A couple of things happened in April in regards to this. So FDA released their report from their investigation into the fall 2020 outbreak of E. coli in leafy greens, and they've identified cattle on adjacent lands as a potential source of the outbreak. So their report included food safety recommendations both for leafy green growers and livestock owners. And they also released an updated version of the Leafy Green Action Plan, really stressing the need for collaborative action to improve the safety of leafy greens. And then finally, we'll mention the Allergen FASTER Act. So FASTER is also an acronym, and that stands for Food Allergy Safety, Treatment, Education, and Research Act. So beyond adding sesame to the U.S. list of allergens, the goal of that act is to make the identification and regulation of food allergens faster, so implying that there may be more additions to the allergen list in the United States coming up in the future. So if any of those apply to you, be sure to seek out additional information. Okay, so now we will talk about our discussion about the Reportable Food Registry. Here's an agenda of what we will specifically be discussing about the RFR. We're going to begin with a history of the Reportable Food Registry to provide a little bit of background, and then we'll move into a discussion about the requirements. We're going to spend most of our time on the requirements because this is where we've really seen the most confusion and have heard from people looking for clarification. We'll also spend some time on the process for submitting an RFR, what happens after you submit, and briefly touch on the consequences of failing to report as required. Sorry about that. Getting used to the controls here. All right, the history of the RFR. So the Reportable Food Electronic Portal has been available on the FDA.gov website since September of 2009, with a revised version released in May 2010 with a new web address. We'll share that web address later in the presentation. So this portal and this requirement are not new by any means, and the FDA expects full compliance at this time. An important goal of the RFR is to prevent the distribution of a product that may be adulterated. So prior to the implementation of this requirement, it was deemed that there were an unacceptable number of occurrences of food contamination reaching the market, even though the adulteration may have been detected somewhere along the food chain. So the RFR places accountability on the whole supply chain. So awareness of an issue becomes a responsibility to report it. We'll talk more about that later. But another purpose of the registry is to track patterns of food and feed adulteration in order to target the FDA's limited inspection resources to protect the public health. So for example, the FDA utilizes the information provided to the registry along with other data like inspection findings, consumer complaints, and recall data to identify key commodity risk points to target public health initiatives. So these initiatives can include planning of inspections, developing guidance documents, generating sampling assignments, issuing import alerts, and other activities. So the information gathered enables the FDA to focus their efforts where the risks are the greatest. At a very basic level, the rule states, and I'm going to just read the FDA's definition here, that the Reportable Food Registry requires a responsible party to file a report through the RFR electronic portal when there is a reasonable probability that the use of or exposure to an article of food will cause serious adverse health consequences or death to humans or animals. And although this appears to be a pretty straightforward definition, there is, of course, plenty of gray area around some of those terms, and that's really what we're going to dig into in the next upcoming slide. So we'll begin with responsible party. So to put it simply, the responsible party is anyone in the food supply chain who becomes aware of a food adulterant. This does not necessarily mean that the party is responsible for the adulteration, but the awareness of the issue makes them responsible for reporting it. And it goes back to what we said earlier about the goals of the Reportable Food Registry. So this applies to everyone who manufactures, processes, packs, or holds food for human or animal consumption in the United States. So yes, animal feed and pet food manufacturers are required to comply with RFR requirements just the same as human food processors. This requirement does not apply to dietary supplements or infant formula, which have their own separate reporting channels. This also does not apply to food that is within the exclusive jurisdiction of the USDA. And specifically within an organization, the responsible party is the individual who submits the FDA food facility registration that you complete every other year. So this is defined as the owner, operator, or agent in charge of a domestic or foreign facility engaged in food processing for food consumption in the United States. A couple of notes on that. So the agent in charge may authorize an individual to report an instance of reportable food on their behalf through the RFR portal. So this is much like they do for the registration requirement. The person who files an RFR does not have to be the same person that registered the facility with the FDA. An important note, if for any reason your facility has not registered with the FDA as required, you're encouraged to take care of that right away for many reasons, one of which you'll need that facility registration number to submit a reportable food through the portal if that becomes necessary. All right, so now we'll take a look at the definition of a reportable food. So this is an article of food for which there is a reasonable probability that the use of or exposure to such article of food will cause serious adverse health consequences or death to humans or animals. If you've taken the preventive controls PCQI training, you'll recognize this terminology as the Dakota Hazards, because like Erin said, we love our acronyms. But this is also very similar to the language used to define a Class 1 recall situation. And the key words here really are serious health consequences or death. Some examples of reportable foods from the FDA's guidance document include peanut butter contaminated with salmonella, ice cream that did not declare peanut-derived ingredients but contained peanut butter as an ingredient, and baby food that posed a choking hazard. So when you identify an issue with the food, there are some key questions you must answer to determine if you have a reportable food. First, you need to determine if you're in a situation that could result in serious adverse health consequences or death. Sometimes that decision is obvious, but most times it can be quite challenging to make this determination. So in those cases, you need to conduct an evaluation of the health hazard presented by the food in question. This should include a risk assessment considering the potential degree of severity if someone was exposed to the product, consider any specific consumer risks, such as, the elderly, immune-compromised, or children potentially consuming the product, the likelihood of occurrence of the hazard, an assessment of the consequences of the hazard, both immediate and long-term. So right now you should be thinking about if you have the necessary expertise within your organization to complete a thorough health hazard evaluation. Depending on the situation, you might need the expertise of a microbiologist or a chemist or a toxicologist or some other specialist. Oftentimes, you don't have that level of expertise within your organization, but that's okay. You just need to think through what resources you can tap into if that expertise is needed. So some places to consider, maybe your external laboratory partners, different industry groups might have that specialty, or food safety consultants, just to name a few. Along with a health hazard evaluation, conducting a thorough root cause analysis will help answer some of these questions and will also be required when completing the RFR in some cases. Another important consideration is, where did the problem originate? Was this issue identified on an incoming ingredient, or was this something that happened within your processing facility? An area where we get questions and confusion around is when the issue originates with your supplier. As we stated earlier, a responsible party is anyone in the food supply chain who becomes aware of a food adulterant. And the FDA's guidance makes it very clear that if you receive a food from your supplier that you determine to be a reportable food, you are required to submit an RFR, even if you've contained the problem and you haven't shipped any of that reportable food. And then lastly, where's the product or ingredient of concern now? Is it still under your control, or has it been transferred to another party? The FDA, it's important to know, FDA does not consider an intra-company transfer to be a transfer to another person as long as the company maintained continuous possession of the food. So if the food's in your own facility or warehouse, it's likely still considered within your control. However, a third-party warehouse owned by someone else is considered a transfer to another party, even if you maintain ownership and direct control over the distribution of that food. And obviously, if the material has been received by your customer, it has definitely left your control. So I know that was a lot of detail in one slide, and it just really points out there's so much to consider and work through when you're in one of these situations. And we'll talk about why the answers to those questions are so important next. So there are some circumstances where you may have an adulterated food with a Dakota Hazard, but you're not required to submit an RFR. For this to apply, all three of these statements must be true. So number one, the adulteration originated with the responsible party. So if the issue was caused by you or originated with you, the responsible party detected the adulteration prior to any transfer to another person of the article food, so it's still in your control, and the responsible party corrected the adulteration or destroyed or caused the destruction of the article of food, so it's no longer a risk. So if you can answer yes to all three of these questions, you do not need to file an RFR. Even if that's the case, it's strongly recommended that you document your decisions and your corrective actions related to the incident, just in case you're subject to an inspection later. But if you answered no to any one of those questions, you are obligated to file an RFR. All right, so what happens once you have determined that you have an RFR situation? Well, you have to report the issue as soon as possible, within 24 hours of determining that you have a reportable food. The link to the reporting portal is provided here, but you can easily find it by doing an internet search of FDA Reportable Food Registry. Once you access the site, you'll see the text box that's shown here to begin your report. A couple of additional notes: you must investigate the root cause if the adulteration originated with you. And in all cases, you'll be prompted to report some key data elements, which we're going to review next. So here's the first set of key data elements. So you'll need that food facility registration number that we talked about earlier. You'll need to note the date the article of food was determined to be reportable, a description of the food, including quantity and amount, the extent and nature of the adulteration, and the results of the investigation of the root cause of the adulteration if it has originated with the responsible party when that is known. Additional information includes disposition of the article of food, product information typically found on packaging sufficient to identify the article of food, and contact information for the immediate previous sources and immediate subsequent recipients of the article of food when that's required by the FDA. So a lot of information. It all appears very straightforward, but it is a lot to remember. You might want to create a template for compiling this data to facilitate the process if the time comes, and maybe make it part of your recall plan or your crisis management plan. You'll really thank yourself later if you have that FDA facility registration number handy within that template, so you're not scrambling for that information if and when this time would come. And also, some of the information you might not have right away. So, we said you have to file within 24 hours of knowing that you have a reportable food. You might not have all of these details, and that's okay. First and foremost, it's important to get the report filed quickly. You can come back later and amend the report with additional information as your investigation develops. Okay, so now we'll talk a little bit about what happens after you file a report in the RFR portal. So after filing, the FDA will issue an individual case safety report number for tracking. You may be required to provide notification to immediate previous sources and subsequent recipients. And on this point, so the responsible party might also be initiating and coordinating product recall activities related to the reportable food. So this RFR reporting that we're talking about will be happening in conjunction with those activities. So you should also be moving forward with your product recall plan if that's appropriate. So just the point that RFR does not take the place of your recall plan. You must also provide amended reports as necessary to fill in that missing or updated information that you gathered in your investigation. And you're required to maintain records associated with the reportable food for at least 2 years. from an FDA standpoint, the FDA's risk control review team will review all submitted reports to first assess whether the item actually meets the definition of a reportable food and to identify any appropriate follow-up actions. For reports that the FDA does consider to meet the definition of a reportable food, a district office investigator will be assigned to contact the firm submitting the report to obtain additional information if necessary. This investigator might visit the firm to conduct a follow-up investigation. In addition, appropriate officials in the states involved will automatically be notified if any reportable food reports pertain to their jurisdiction. Also, if there are indications that the subject food may have been intentionally adulterated, FDA will send a copy of the report to the Department of Homeland Security. So essentially, FDA will collaborate with any and all authorities as needed to protect the public health. What happens if you determine you have a reportable food, but you don't report it through the RFR portal? Well, here's a statement from the FDA. So failure to report a reportable food is a prohibited act under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. So the company would be in violation of federal law and could be subject to fines or other penalties. And given the serious consequences for failing to report as required, it's really recommended to err on the side of caution when it comes to reporting. In some cases, it's advisable even to report to the RFR, even if you've not fully determined that the item could lead to serious adverse health consequences or death. Filing does not mean you're admitting to it being serious, and it does not automatically trigger the need for a recall. Remember that every report is first reviewed by the FDA's risk control review team to assess whether the item actually meets the definition of a reportable food before any additional required actions are determined.
All right.
Okay, so now that we've discussed the rules, we want to test your understanding.
Yeah, so Mary, thank you so much for going through all of that. Very informative. And here's the pop quiz that I was mentioning to everyone. So in a minute, everyone's going to see this pop up on their screen. We actually want you to take a second to record your answer. We don't know who you are. Don't worry about that. Just answer the best you can. These are all yes or no. Do you need to file an RFR? Your supplier informs you. Sent. Let me do this. Launch poll. Come up in front of everyone in just a second. Your supplier informs you that an ingredient they sent you contained an undeclared peanut allergen. Is everyone seeing that yet? Or, yep, should be coming up.
We see it.
All right, perfect. You haven't used the ingredient yet. Yes or no? We've got about 41% voting so far. And we're going to do these pretty quick because we've got, this is a pop quiz. There's a few more coming up. So, and then what we'll do is at the end of all of the 5, then Mary, what we'll do, well, actually, we'll close the poll and then you tell us the answer. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
All right, we're going to close the poll in just another second here. So I'm going to share what everyone said very quickly. You'll see this kind of pop up on your screen. So what's the answer? Do you need to file an RFR if your supplier informs you about an undeclared peanut allergen? Excuse me.
Yes. So in this scenario, you would likely need to file an RFR, even though the adulteration originated at your supplier. Since you received the ingredient, you are now a responsible party to initiate an RFR for this item.
All right, thank you, Mary. Now that means we need to go back to school.
And that, honestly, that's really the area where there's the most confusion generally, is when it's related to a supplier. And just remembering that once you have received that material, you're now a responsible party.
Okay, all right. Well, we're going to launch another one. Mary, thank you. The next one is you got a call from a customer saying they found pieces of plastic in your product. This is going to launch on your screens here very shortly. Again, we'll take about 30 seconds. Register your questions. I know some of you are huddling around a phone. Maybe you're in a conference room with some others arguing yes or no. That's okay. We want to collect your answer as quickly as possible so we can get through the rest of the quiz. Again, hopefully you realize by now this is just kind of fun and a good way to reinforce the knowledge set. So I'm going to close this in about 5 more seconds. Customer, they found pieces of plastic. Do you need to file an RFR? All right, we're going to close this, share the results, and then once you see the results on your screen, Mary, why don't you give us the true answer?
Yeah.
Okay?
And it looks like we're split 50-50 almost. And that's understandable because I'll admit this is a little bit of a trick question. And the answer is it depends. So this situation would depend on the results of your health hazard evaluation, considering the potential severity, likelihood, and potential consumer. If the adulteration is deemed to represent a serious adverse health consequence or death, then yes, you would need to file an RFR. And if not, then no.
All right. Trick questions are approved. All right. Good one, Mary. All right, we're going to go to the next one here. Your finished product was accidentally shipped. I'm going to open this up before you received the testing results. Okay, this is sometimes it happens. You're not sure of the status of that test, right? And the lab just called to report they found positive listeria. That's the bad one. So what do we do here? Do we report? Do we file an RFR? Go ahead and go ahead and put your votes in there real quick. It looks like we've got, so I believe it or not, Mary, I can see the results as they come in real time. This one's an easy one. This one was a gimme. So if the last one was a trick question, this one was a gimme, right?
Yep, for sure. So yes, the answer to this one is yes. El Mono is a Dakota Hazard and the product has left your control. So just an important note, you can't test your way out of a positive with additional negative results. And it also doesn't matter if your direct consumer has used the item or not. In this example, the product left your control, so it would be reportable.
Aha, very good. I like that added detail. Thank you. So you can't test your way out of a positive. All right, next question. We've got 3 more, so we're going to get through these. Do you need to file an RFR? You conducted pre-shipment. Let me launch this really quick. You conducted pre-shipment testing of an ingredient and obtained a positive salmonella result. Okay, we got another positive test case. None of that ingredient lot had been received at your facility, though. So this is an interesting one. You need to file.
Aaron, I think you have the final poll question up right now.
Your plant. Oh, I did. It's out of order. So we're going to do this one instead. Your plant manager discovers damaged equipment and missing bolts. Believes the bolts were in shipped product. Is the RFR required? Thanks, Mary. I've got the slides and the polls in out of order. My apologies. So it's your plant manager. Bolts, equipment, missing bolts. Believes the bolts were shipped in the product. Do you need to file the RFR? So we've got a good combination of people. I'm going to close this poll here now, and we'll share the results. As always, Mary, go ahead when you see the poll results.
Yeah.
Tell us the answer.
So I'm afraid I gave you another it depends. So the scenario as presented really doesn't have enough information to prompt the filing of an RFR. So again, you'd need to conduct a root cause analysis and a health hazard evaluation to decide if there's an adulteration that represents a risk of serious adverse health consequences or death. And remembering that the HHE must include considerations for all potential consumers, so children, elderly, whoever might be consuming. You also need to know for sure that the product has left your control. So, this statement just says the plant believes the bolts were in shipped product, but those are the details that you really need to determine for sure through those investigations. So if both of those things were true, then yes, you would need to file an RFR. If not, then the answer would be no.
All right, so I think we're going to give this to everyone. It's yes and no. It depends, but you do want to conduct
They all did their own evaluations in their heads and came up with those answers.
Exactly. Good one. Okay, so we'll get us back on track. The next one I'm going to put up is the one that I was just talking about. Excuse me. Which is you conducted pre-shipment testing of an ingredient and obtained a positive salmonella result. None of that ingredient lot had been received at your facility. So that should be coming up. Do we need to file an RFR here? So we've got a lot of people voting very quickly. Appreciate everyone's attention here. This is fun, Mary. I really love this format that you introduced for us. All right, give it a couple more seconds. Again, none of the ingredient was received at your facility. Pre-shipment testing, salmonella, what do we do? I'm gonna close this poll. Last couple of votes coming in. All right, and then when you see these results on your screen, Mary,
All right. The majority of the people got this one right, and this wasn't a trick question. So the answer to this one is no. So if a sample tested positive, but none of the product was received at your facility, you are not responsible to file an RFR. That supplier may be required to if any of the product had left their control to another entity, and you'll definitely want to notify your supplier of that result, but you do not need to file an RFR in this example. So nice job.
Very good, absolutely. Nice job. And we've just got one more. So the last one we have is about, well, there's the damaged equipment. Oop,
nope, I think that was all of them, Aaron.
Was it? Okay, cool. Your supplier sent an ingredient. Oh, yep, that is it. So we do have a couple other questions I think coming in. Let me go to those very quickly. We do have a couple things. The one question I had, Mary, myself, and I'd like to ask this is, you know, when you when you do a destruction of articles of food, right? Like, so if there's something bad and you're going to destroy that food, you know, you're going to have to at some point destroy the food or that article, right? Do you destroy it? You have to wait until after you report, or can you destroy it before, or is it just kind of best judgment? Is there any guidance on that?
Right. That's a really great question. The way that it's written is that you are responsible to correct the adulteration or destroy the article of food. So you absolutely can go ahead and begin the correction or destruction of the food while you're getting ready to file this RFR. Of course, as in any case, you want to have good records of that destruction.
Yeah, okay, great. So another one here, we just have a few more. Is there a way to file a mock RFR as a part of a mock exercise?
Oh.
This is interesting because if you think about it, the only way to really test this is to use the portal and go through that whole process. How would you do that? Any recommendations, Mary?
Yeah, so that's a great idea. And as far as I'm aware, no, there's not a fake portal or a sandbox kind of to use. But I think what I would do and I would recommend is to really, you know, we've outlined the key data elements here in this presentation. And so if you fill out a template with all of these items, then you could go through and use that as part of your like mock recall exercises. I think that's a great idea to make sure that you'd have all of that information handy or you'd know where to get it.
Excellent. Good idea. Okay. Another question. If a third-party logistics company was to receive product that is involved in a recall, is the warehouse required to register? Can you recover that again? There was that one specific sort of if you own the product, or there was a bit of a nuance to that, wasn't there?
Yeah. So the conversation we had about the third-party warehouse was around whether or not the product had left your control. And if it did go to a third-party warehouse, we said yes, it did. But I think the interesting twist this person is asking is about what if you are operating a third-party warehouse and you discover this adulteration? So I would say the same is true. They become a responsible party because they have received this article of food. I would need to report.
Got it. Okay, great. Thank you. So another question, that was, thanks Allison for asking that. Another question, with strict regulations for the need for filing RFR, how do we handle the scenario? It depends. Do you have a list of reported food to refer to? So I think I'll take this one. It's kind of a decomposed question a little bit, Mary. You know, the template that you're talking about would be the first thing to kind of run through to make sure you understand. And what I heard you say earlier was very important. If you're in doubt, report, right? Because the idea is you're going to start the process in the positive way to make sure that the food that may be contaminated is not going to get out there, correct?
Right. Yep. I would agree. Good answer.
Yeah, okay. All right, couple more. Maria asks, if I received a product that must be reported through RFR, but my supplier informed me that they have already submitted the RFR, do I need to report it as well or not?
I would say yes.
Very good, because the
You
response,
you received,
right?
yep, you received it, so you're also a responsible party, and that FDA risk review team can correlate those reports accordingly.
Mhm.
But you definitely, you're required to, so go ahead and do it. Otherwise you're kind of taking the word for someone else that they're going to be doing that really important step.
Yeah, and in that case, what I would do is just I would also advocate for open, transparent communication. Let that
Absolutely.
know, hey, we're going to take this step two. We're going to need the details that you had so that you sync up a little bit. So,
I
what
think
about
that's a great idea. And it really comes to the partnerships that you have with those suppliers too, just communicating, hey, we're in this together. We're required to do this as well, but we'll work together through it.
Yeah, and that's the ultimate piece. Don't think of this as a break in the trust or relationship. These things happen. Work together to resolve it. And I tell you what, through time, you're going to get more confident. You're just going to know, hey, this is a partner that's willing to step up, do the RFR, do the right due diligence, and that's what's really going to protect your brand, right?
Absolutely.
So here's an interesting question, Mary. What about co-manufacturers? So co-man, co-pack, so they make and ship product that is adulterated and product is in your brand package. Now who files the RFR? Is that still the
Oh goodness.
owners? Yeah, a good one, huh? And this is
Yeah.
this is where you can politely bow out and say, that might be a better question for one of our tags in staff lawyers.
Well, I do. It is complicated, but it does get complicated. Those are things that you're dealing with in your food manufacturing facilities all the time. But I would just go back to what were those key questions um, on that one slide that we showed. Is it a Dakota Hazard? Where is it right now? Who has ownership of it? And working through those details, that should be able to answer the question.
Yeah, good answer. Thanks, Mary. So we do have a few people asking about this template. Now I want to make sure, does Tag, Mary, do you have a template built that's available? If not, that's okay. I have another recommendation or suggestion.
No, so when I mentioned template, I didn't have one particularly in mind. I was just thinking if I was still in a position where I was overseeing food safety in a manufacturing plant, I would build one. And I would
Mhm.
build one based on the slides that we presented here today that I'm sure will be available to everybody after the call. And I would just make a template with here's the key data elements that we're going to need to have. Here's the questions that we need to ask so you can be getting yourself ready to conduct those health hazard evaluations when the time comes. So
Yep.
I'm really not even suggesting anything fancy. I'm just suggesting, putting all this information in one place, because when these things come up, it's stressful and you want to have a good structured plan for how you're going to attack it.
Yeah, this is where technology can kind of kick in for you in the positive. So our customers build these types of templates using our flexible tool set, right? And they can actually go through an RFR. They could model it, in fact, to the industry, so you can actually get all the data points that you'd need to collect to actually submit the RFR. Collect it, it then becomes an auditable record on your side that you control, right? Now that is important, right? You have that. Now you can share it very easily with anyone, like another, your partner or maybe downstream in that supply chain. But ultimately, that takes the guesswork out of it because it's a controllable form. You can do it on a mobile phone, a tablet, something like that. And that just makes it easier for people to conduct the analysis to make sure that you're getting the right RFRs done. So that is something there. So one last question from Maria, and then we'll wrap it up. Does RFR apply to restaurants?
No. So the definition is those who manufacture. I'm pulling this back up because I don't want to try to memorize it.
Of course.
It applies to those that manufacture, process, pack, or hold food for humans or animal consumption in the United States.
There it is. There it is. All right. Mary, thank you so much. I know Atchison Group has a lot of great resources on your website. If you don't have it, go get the newsletter. It's absolutely brilliant. Reach out to them if you do have any other questions. If you get some CFR or RFR, excuse me, questions, these are the folks you want in your corner. Okay, very simply. So there's also other resources on SafetyChain, a content library, and we've got FSMA Friday coming up in June. It's going to be right around the corner, and we're going to be working with Rolando Gonzalez, VP of Public Health. So join us again. Come back soon. Mary, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. I've enjoyed it.
All right. Cheers, everyone. Have a great weekend, and keep us safe out there with our food. Thank you.